Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Brady. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. Thank you for being here. You are officially the smartest people here because it's nice and cool and air-conditioned in here. So thank you for being here. I'd like to hand it over to Mike Schad, and he's the Director of Cabrillo Marine Aquarium.
Thank you, Caroline. Well, thank you again for being here, everyone. And as we've been saying throughout the morning and now into the afternoon, this is all about having us all think about where our fish is coming from. And remember, when I say fish, I'm also talking about other types of seafood like shrimp and crab. And you're going to be hearing about those things from our panelists in just a couple minutes. So welcome to the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. This is the first time we've had the Sustainable Seafood Expo right here on our site. We're very excited about that. It's a big deal, but it also fits so nicely with our mission of trying to be that trusted source that you, the audience and citizens and residents of this area come to learn more about the ocean and how we're doing and what we can do to make it better. Today I'm joined up on the panel today by Taylor Debevec. Taylor, if you can raise your hand. Taylor is a contractor with Ocean Associates. She's working with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and she'll be talking more about what she does and what her organization does about international tuna management. So we're going to be hearing more about that. We also have Captain Ben Hyman, who is right here. And Captain Ben is from UCSB, where he graduated and went on to become a commercial fisherman while he was in school, is what I found out right as I was coming up, and continues to do exactly that for 21 years. He's going to be giving the perspective of not only the marine science end of things from his experience as a student, but also his experience as a commercial fisherman. And those are the kind of things that we're trying to get here as perspectives. And I think Captain Ben is going to help us with that. We also have Christina Borger Salas, who is with us today, right over there. Christina, if you could raise your hand. And Christina is currently a marine biologist with the U.S. Navy. And you might ask, what does the U.S. Navy have a marine biologist for? She doesn't just study Marines. She actually studies... I've always wanted to say that.
You're welcome.
And Christina, you gave me that. Thank you so much, Christina, for giving me that opportunity. She is going to be talking about what she does as a marine biologist, as a subject matter expert for fish. She has also, in the past, worked here at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, so she's certainly one of our own. She's also worked with plastics at the Algalita Marine Research Center. So you're going to be hearing a lot about those kinds of issues with Christiana today. And then finally, we have Kelly Sace, who is with us, and Kelly is also one of our alums here at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. She has left us to become the principal and co-founder of Strategic Earth Consulting. And the big thing with Kelly and her group is she's bringing people together to talk about public policy. And you all know that that's not always easy because not everybody agrees with everything. What a surprise, right? So getting people with different perspectives in the same place and having them talk to each other so we come up with the best choice we can is her job and her company's job. So we really appreciate having them all here today. So if you could help me welcome them to the stage, please. And now I'm going to move over here and become part of them. I'm very honored to be able to do that, by the way. And I'm going to have each of them say just an opening word or two, and then once we're all done, I've got a couple questions that I'd like to ask them. And we welcome questions from the audience. However, please remember that we're taping this and we're sending this off to other folks. So we've got a microphone that we'd like you to speak into with your questions. So I will be the runner to make that happen, with some help maybe. So we'll see how well that works. So just because Ben is right here next to me, Ben, do you have a few words of opening remarks you'd like to say to the group?
Sure. It's nice to be here. I grew up the son of environmentalist, but I had an early love for the ocean, whether it was surfing, fishing, that ended up developing into a career as a commercial fisherman. But I think it's good you guys all get a unique perspective from the fisherman's angle so that there's all sides shown. And at the same time, for us me being a fisherman, for us to have a future, I think it's important all of us work together to ensure that fish stocks are rebuilt, to ensure that most of these species are on incline due to scientific management rather than decline due to overfishing.
Great. Thank you very much. And Taylor, please.
Yeah, thanks. So, as Mike said, I'm a contractor for NOAA Fisheries, or National Marine Fisheries Service, and we do have a booth outside. So, if you'd like some more information about the federal agency that manages U.S. fisheries, please come stop by afterwards if you have more questions. And I think managing fisheries is really important because we try to be the balance. We balance the fishermen and commercial and recreational interests with the science and the conservation, economics, business, policy, and really try to ensure that our fisheries remain in balance to benefit not only the stocks and keep our oceans full, but also the livelihoods of fishermen abundant as well.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. Christiana.
Thank you again for having me here. I just want to let you all know how important it is that you all are here in this room today. And getting yourself educated about sustainable seafood is really, really awesome, and it's very helpful in the solution, so thank you for that. My background is in marine debris and fish ecology. I was born and raised in San Pedro, so fishing has always been an important part of my life, so thank you again for having me.
Great. Kelly, please.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the Canadian transplant that arrived here, I can't believe, 16 years ago, and have had the pleasure of working in Southern California since that time. And really, I think the part that I'm excited to talk a little bit about and learn from you all as well is the importance of relationships. And when you're talking about responsible fishing practices, when you're talking about responsible policies and laws related to how fish are harvested and cultivated, and in the relationships, the core people that help to ensure that all those things happen, folks need to be able to speak with one another in a way that is respectful, that is open, that is collaborative, and we try our best as part of our team and the folks that we have the pleasure of working with to help facilitate that. So look forward to sharing a little bit more about that as we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for those opening remarks. I'm going to skip around a little bit, ask some questions of our panelists. And remember, if you have a question, if you could kind of raise your hand and get my eye. I'm trying very hard to look out at the audience pretty regularly to see what's going on. I'm not just checking to see if you're falling asleep. I'm really trying to make sure that this is as interactive as can be. So we'll do that as much as possible. I'm going to start with you, Kelly, because we're right there.
Let's do it.
And what I'd like to hear about, and I think the audience would too, is what types of projects is Strategic Earth involved with? And we know that you talked about trying to get people together and facilitating those conversations. Tell us about some of these things that involve fishermen and leading to the effort to address challenging. There's a lot of challenging environmental issues.
There absolutely are. And I think it's important to acknowledge, too, right off the bat that, from our perspective, and when I say our, the team that I have the pleasure of working with is Strategic Earth Consulting. Fishermen, a lot of time, Ben is a perfect example. We're the original sort of conservationists, the original environmentalists, and it's amazing what can happen when you bring folks from that place of solutions, of wanting to work together towards a solution, just sort of what can be accomplished. So Strategic Earth Consulting has existed for the last 10 years, which is just amazing. Ended up starting Strategic Earth after doing some graduate work and really interested in where science, policy, and communications kind of come together. And as part of that, we have had the real privilege of helping to facilitate conversations with diverse and complex audiences around really challenging circumstances and scenarios. One of the projects that we're working on right now, which folks may have heard a lot about in the news, so we have an increasing and thriving, in many cases, whale population or whales populations off the coast of Southern California and northern. And there have been more and more interactions with those whales and fishing gear. And so we have a group of fishermen with the California Dungeness crab fishing industry who came forward 2 years ago after conversations with some of the federal and state agencies and decided that they wanted to play a proactive role in helping to address this kind of issue. And that brought together the fishermen, environmental organizations, and state and federal agencies, along with some other audiences like whale watching, the whale watching community, and researchers and scientists, to come together and really have been working diligently over the last 2 years to think about the issue of whale entanglements, address and start investigating some of the information that's just not known about whale entanglements, why they happen, what that looks like, and to be able to try and work as a fleet, as an industry, to proactively and responsibly be able to navigate those challenging circumstances. And again, coming from that place, a group of 20 to 30 people, all united by that vision of thriving whale populations and thriving fishing communities, and that those do not need to be, that those can coexist, and that folks can work together to address that. I don't know if that's
Right.
helpful, if I can
No.
share any more, but.
Kelly, I think that's a great start. I mean, these are the kind of things we're looking to hear from. And I think that it's kind of a nice segue into a question for Ben, and that is that in terms of, you talked about getting these fish, and as a commercial fisherman, you do this naturally. But you also, as Kelly said, you come from a profession that really was some of the early environmentalists. You folks wanted to make sure that what you were doing today, you were going to be able to do in the future, and that your kids were going to be able to do it because you like it, and you wanted this to be something that was sustainable. So could you talk a little bit about this whole idea of sourcing local, sustainable seafood, and how it affects our economy and kind of the world's oceans?
Sure. I think it's really important, I can kind of slow it down and dumb it down. When it comes to seafood, you can kind of either be part of the solution or be part of the problem. And there's a lot of guides out there, references, and ways to kind of make yourself an instantaneous expert. The first one that I think it's important that everyone utilizes would be the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Guide, where they'll rate fish for you. You can get an app on your phone, you can carry it in your pocket, and it'll let you know what you really should be eating or you should avoid. When looking at this too, you have to ask questions. And, as consumers, sometimes we go into a restaurant and we just eat. You might have a drink, you might be hanging out, you eat what's put in front of you. But if you really want to do something good for the world's ocean, for local fishermen, to kind of perpetuate a better system, you have to ask questions. And they're really simple questions. Where is it from? How is it caught? How did it get here? And if someone can't tell you that, then already I'm suspicious. You want someone to know where your fish is from and where your food is from. So I think it takes asking those important questions. The next thing is if a restaurant doesn't carry that type of seafood, so they say, well, we only have these terrible options. It's farm-raised shrimp, maybe from Southeast Asia, maybe it's farm salmon because they get it at a cheaper price point. As consumers, you get to vote with your wallet. So if you tell a business owner, and most restaurants are for-profit, that you aren't going to eat what they're offering, if enough people speak up, typically the menu changes and typically people will conform to what we want. And when we look at seafood, because more than 90%, I don't know if you guys all knew that, it's around 90% of the seafood we have in America is imported. Where it comes from, how it's caught, the impact on the oceans it's coming from is typically not as good as what you're going to get here locally. So a good guideline, you can't always do it, but would be to start trying to source locally. And there's lots of options. You guys have the Dory Fleet, which is in Newport Beach. I own a business, Wild Local Seafood Company. We do 4 farmers markets in a week in LA. You can come out and see us. You can get on the internet and find things in places like Alaska, Oregon, Northern California, where you can directly source from the fishermen or through CSFs. But I think the main thing is to be vigilant as a consumer. If you just eat what's given to you and you don't really fight to have these things change, you're negatively impacting the ocean. You're negatively impacting the world's oceans. So it's hard to believe, but just by sourcing the right seafood, you're doing something good for the ocean. You could go down to the beach and pick up trash, or you could actually source a piece of sustainable seafood, which reduces our carbon footprint, puts less pressure on the world's oceans, supports our local economy if it's local fish. So this is kind of win-win-win compared to a no-no.
Is there a question right there? Let's get that going. Thank you so much. By the way, while the mic is getting to the person, while Ben was talking, I took out of my wallet my seafood watch card. I carry these around. Now, granted, I'm lucky I can just go get another one, because what I'll do quite often is I'll leave these on the table after I ask my questions, so that the waiter can take this, hopefully, I'm kind of hoping here, and know that somebody cared. Another thing that we're doing today, by the way, is we've got some students from San Pedro High School, the Global Environmental House, which is an academy right there at the school, and they're helping people download onto their phones Seafood Watch. We are a partner with Seafood Watch. Now, also, the Aquarium of the Pacific, just across the way here, has Seafood for the Future. We want you to find resources, whether it be our friends at the Aquarium of the Pacific, whether it be our friends at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. The New England Aquarium has these kinds of things. Of course, it's nice to have the West Coast aquariums. And we happen to be, we've been a partner with the Seafood Watch since its inception almost 20 years ago. So I'm glad you brought that up. It is something that we're doing today. The cards are available for free to pick them up. And you can download the app, and there'll be high school students helping you do that. So it works out real well. We have a question.
Yes, this question is probably mostly for Ben, but for anyone else who has information on it. So you own a business, you run a business that's a community-supported fishery. What are the main impediments to growing that business, and how would you suggest they be overcome?
There's impediments everywhere. I mean, it was a really uphill battle. I used to get called a fish hippie and you know, all these different things. But I've noticed this growth in the farm-to-table movement. You know, people want to know what farm it comes from. They want to know it's local. And luckily, there's been that resonating tone in Southern California. I think a lot of people, including yourselves for just being here, are above the curve and in front of the ball in that scenario. Impediments often, though, are cost. It costs more, but a great sentence from one of the first fishermen I worked for, and this is in 1997, he always would say, cheap seafood isn't good, and good seafood isn't cheap. So you can spend a little more money and do something sustainable. With restaurants, it can be a little bit harder of a battle because mine's of a co-op and a little less of a CSF. And we do not just ultimate consumers like a CSF, we also deal with restaurants. And it's pretty hard to convince someone to spend a little more money to do something for the environment, especially when the bottom line is the kind of overriding decision-making factor. But there are lots of impediments. Other impediments when you own a business like mine are because it's not homogenized coming year-round. If we have a lot of wind like we did last week, you know, our company makes a quarter of what we would on the typical week. And I have to avoid all the emails I get from other companies. Oh, we've got this really cheap fish from this other country, you know, it's caught unsustainably. You can buy it and you can sell it, but we just abstain and we'll wait for the weather to get better. But the amount of impediments are high. But I feel like if enough people are conscious and they want to support that type of system, which is a sustainable future for our planet, local fishermen, the world's oceans, you can overcome it. And my business has grown exponentially over the last 4 years and really viable. We have 14 employees now. So,
do you see your costs going down as you have more and more customers? Do you see costs being reduced in the future? So
my cost or cause?
Costs.
Well, with my company, the more money I make, it seems like the more problems I have. Because as we grow, you know, we deal with the EDD, Environmental Health Department, and all the labor laws. And you know, the first year I did this, it was me, my boat, an ice chest, and a scale. And you know, we would drive places. Now it's a little more complex.
It's good. Thank you.
I mean, Mike, can I just add two? I'm just over here. Hi, it's Kelly. Mike.
Oh, Kelly.
I love you.
I was thinking, where is this coming from?
Where is this fabulous voice from the heavens?
Thank you, Kelly.
Coming from? So sorry. Just really briefly to also say, again, to Ben's point of like how wonderful it is that you're all here. I mean, how many of you, and again, thoughtfully, have had a conversation with a commercial fisherman before? How many of you have been able to, hear someone like Ben be able to share his story? I think being able to seek that out more and more. I see, again, as part of this my own philosophy of opening lines of communication. It is amazing when I have someone from an organization that is typically designed to, sue, they're an environmental organization focused on suing folks to make a change, and sitting down and having a conversation with a recreational, a commercial fisherman, a member of a local, indigenous nation who also relies on fishing for subsistence. Having those kinds of conversations and building an understanding, just a relationship and an awareness can go a long way to, from my perspective, from helping to minimize or at least build down some of those impediments that Ben was talking about. It's about raising that awareness. So just to say that aloud too. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Kelly. Of
course.
And thank you, Ben. I wanted to ask, we have a question.
Yeah, Ben, and thank you all for this opportunity. Where's it from seems pretty straightforward. How about how's it get here? How should we think about that?
Well, reducing your miles from food to source, or from source to ultimate consumer, is a huge issue. And you can look at something like, I can give an example, like farm-raised salmon, okay? You have salmon in Chile, South America. There's no natural occurring salmonoid there, but you have this mass production. Well, you take grain from the Midwest, usually GMO grain, you ship it, big carbon footprint to grow it, big carbon footprint to get it down there. You farm the fish, again, big carbon footprint, and then you ship it all the way back. And that just takes a lot of petroleum. And then the other things people do, like in sources like Japan, some of this, it's fresh, it came from last night, is usually flown, and there's a really big carbon footprint when you use air freight as well.
So how to get here is a little bit distinct from where's it from, but not that, okay, thanks.
These are good questions. You're starting to see the complexity of this, I'm sure. And I also mentioned this earlier in one of the chef's demo. I think sometimes we think that these are going to be solvable just by making one or two. We're asking you to make that first step, to ask the question. Trust me, you're going to be hearing the next thing. Where does it come from? And how does it get there? And what are the social justice issues with having people work for your particular company? These are all issues that we're hoping people are going to pay attention to. But sometimes when you start there, it becomes pretty unsurmountable. It seems like you'll never figure it out. So we want you to be aware of it, we want you to think about it, and then make your best choice as you can. I do want to get to some questions for Christiana and Taylor, though. For Christiana, I know that you're working with fisheries now. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how marine mammals and turtles are involved with these kinds of issues, Christiana, of fishing.
Well, I think, as you were saying before, there's a lot of issues with derelict fishing gear. And as a consumer, we tend to look at this and say, oh God, it's the fisherman's fault. Like, why is he leaving all his gear? Why isn't he picking it back up? But you have to remember, like, these people are fishing in pretty aggressive conditions, and a lot of time it's just Mother Ocean that takes these pots away, and it has nothing to do with the fishermen, and it's pretty unfair to blame them. However, as consumers, again, we need to look at the problems with this derelict gear, and a big thing is entanglement, not only in sea turtles, in the large whales, but as lines break down, you're getting marine debris, you're getting plastics in the water from the floats, from just the breakdowns of the cages themselves. So it's not just that we need to be sustainable and make good choices about our fishing, but we need to think about all the other organisms that it affects. Also with the farm-raised issues, and I know Ben was talking about this, about shipping the seafood out, and it's kind of a sobering fact, but if you look at something like salmon, it's only caught in Alaska for like a couple weeks during the year. And 90% of the salmon is actually shipped to Asia. It is processed there, it is refrozen, and it is reshipped back to America. And that's because it's actually cheaper to do all this processing in another country. I mean, if most of you knew about this, I think you'd be a little more hesitant to buy your salmon, even if it claims that it is wild salmon. It's been around the world, so it's something we definitely need to be conscious of. I guess I didn't hit too much on the marine mammals and the turtles.
You did, because
they count too.
It does, and certainly both you and Kelly have talked about entanglement, and these are issues that we need to be able to be aware of as we go. I did want to get to Taylor and have her tell us a little bit about tuna, because does anybody know the most commonly eaten seafood in this country? Yeah, if you're guessing shrimp, the answer is, oh yeah. By a whole lot, shrimp is. But right after that, a very, very close second, or maybe not very close, but tuna. Tuna certainly is something that you are all very familiar with, even if it's something directly out of a can, not necessarily something you buy from a fresh seafood area. So Taylor, could you tell us a little about kind of tuna and this whole idea of this international view of tuna, where it comes from?
Definitely. So tuna are really fascinating in that they migrate across the entire Pacific Ocean. So when we're talking about salmon or halibut, fish like this, they're right within our coastal waters, whether it's state or federal, out to 200 nautical miles. However, tuna don't really care about our lines that we've drawn through the ocean, and they travel from Japan out to kind of Baja area and all the way back to Japan again. And we're talking about bluefin tuna, big eye and yellowfin tuna, which are referred to as ahi. That's probably how you know it better. Skipjack tuna, albacore. So it makes managing them and managing those fisheries sustainably a little bit more complicated than some that are totally within our national purview. And there are these international organizations, and I like to call them the United Nations of fishing. Basically, it's a group of countries that are all interested in these stocks that come together and agree on common terms, common numbers or limits for fishing on these species, because we all share them. So if Japan makes a huge reduction in how much they're catching, but the US doesn't, there's really no net benefit. So if we all collectively agree, it's a lot more powerful, a lot more effective. It certainly is more complicated to negotiate with other countries, but it's a vital part of why we've been able to ensure that tuna in the Pacific are sustainable.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. Now, folks, I have some more questions to ask them. However, I don't want to miss the opportunity for you in the audience. If you have a question that already has come up in this conversation, please make sure you get my attention, and we will make sure that you have your opportunity to ask that question. Anybody have any questions right now? You all can't wait to hear what questions I have, can you? Well, I'm going to ask them, and I'm getting back to Ben on this one. Ben, you know, we've gone through a drought, and then we had this marvelous year where everything's just up and running and beautiful again. We got all the water we can handle. You know, I'm saying that sarcastically, where the answer to all of us is that in between the drought is literally just in between the next drought. We're in for another drought in the future. How are these kinds of things and ultimately climate change affecting some of your commercial future?
Definitely a big impact. One thing I've always been addicted to was salmon fishing. And this is my 21st season as a California king salmon fisherman. Woo-hoo. So most people assume that all of the troll-caught king salmon you get from Alaska, but the reality is the season this year up there was only July 1st to the 5th, 5 days. However, in California, I fished all of May, all of June. July was closed down. We fished all of August. I fished all of September up until 4 days ago, and then it closes October 14th. So we have this big king salmon fishery, mostly Sacramento Delta fish. When I highlight where they're from, Sacramento Delta, I don't know if you guys are up to date on some of the battles that were going on before the drought, but there's just a lot of controversy in that area of where the water should go. A lot of big farms, a lot of big farming, and these beautiful wild king salmon, these Chinook salmon, they need cold, clean running water to go, A, up the river, and then B, to spawn and their juvenile and their smolts to come back down. So what we saw for a couple of years was a large percentage of the juvenile smolt fish dying. And luckily, there were some groups, one of the groups I'm part of, which is the Golden Gate Salmon Association, we actually took measures to counteract the drought. So sounds hard to believe, but as fishermen, what we did is we had hatcheries rear almost 1 million fish a year, and then not my boat in particular, but a couple of the guys I work with, they trucked the fish from these hatcheries down lower in the river, put them in boats, and then the boats drove them further down, so they were in a spot where there was colder, cleaner water, and then release the fish. And we did, I think, something like almost 3 million fish over 3 years. And I participated in the salmon season this year, and with all of the implications of the drought, people thought there'd be no fish. And they thought it was going to be a really poor season, so it was limited. Lo and behold, the Golden Gate area in front of San Francisco had the best sport salmon return in over 30 years. Clearly, this was from the work that the organization that I'm a member of, not a huge part in it, the work they did, and some of the conservation efforts that were put out. When we look, though, at things like salmon and drought, there is an ongoing battle just because as consumers, we're taking a lot of the Sacramento Delta water, we're using it, and at the same time, these salmon have a real big wall in front of them, metaphorically and literally, because there's a lot of dams in the state of California. As well, we have a problem with our striper, which are an invasive species that are introduced from the East Coast, which really like to eat these salmon when the watersheds are really low. You can imagine all these salmon, when there's a big running river in the Sacramento Delta, they have the ability to kind of evade these striper. When the watershed gets smaller and smaller and smaller, no pun intended, fish in a barrel, the striper have a real field day on the salmon. So to bring it all back around, we have had drought, but if people are conscious, you guys could all get on the internet and contribute $1 to the Golden Gate Salmon Association. You can use a little less water as you move forward and do some of these things to counteract it. We were able to battle through these issues.
Thank you, Ben. I know these aren't easy issues to deal with, but I think it's imperative to all of us that live here in Southern California to monitor our water, even in years where we are being told that there's plenty of it. We take care of it. That means we're going to be we'll be a little more drought resistant, which is what we're trying to do. We're running out of time very quickly, so I want to give each one of our panelists one last chance to say some things. So I think Kelly, do you want to say something before we?
Yeah, just thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. I think a few things that come up for me right immediately. One, just continuing this emphasis on relationship building, this multi-directional exchange of dialogue for learning and growing. From my perspective, it's a core to success in achieving and sort of, I guess, overcoming, but then achieving some of these issues. We were part of a meeting last week with the Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group, the group that's been charged to help the state and the federal agencies, National Marine Fisheries Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, to address this issue related to whale entanglements and Dungeness crab fishing gear. I do have a few materials up front related to a best practices guide that the group has come up with, also a fact sheet about the group itself. They're working with the California Dungeness Crab Task Force on a gear recovery program. To Christiana's point of the need to, it's deemed lost gear in their world as opposed to derelict, but all the same gear that has been left out in the ocean, perhaps, for nobody's fault, but just trying to fish and be productive. And yet there is, there's this byproduct of fishing and folks being very proactive and mobilizing at a local level to be able to get that gear out of the water once the season ends. And also just, I think the other piece is that California is an incredible leader with regards to fisheries management policy. The kind of fish that you eat from California has been harvested in a very responsible way, and so continuing to emphasize that and to be a model to other states and places throughout the world. It's an incredible place to be and to support local seafood and fisheries. So I don't know if that's helpful, but just to say those things out loud. Thanks, everyone.
And it's great to be able to do that, because when it comes down to it, if you're supporting local fishermen, they're going to be able to continue to do their work, and they're under a tremendous amount of regulations to make sure things are sustainable. So if you're buying stuff locally, you're getting probably the best choice in that regard, besides the other things that we talked about how it gets to us. Christiana, do you have some parting words for our group?
I mean, here's the thing. We're so lucky where we live in Southern California. We have like the best local seafood that we can go out and catch lobsters by ourselves, which the season just opened yesterday. We can hop on party boats. We can go to the fish markets. We can buy sustainable. We have all this opportunity here, and we should really, really take advantage of it. I think the issue really comes down to having consumer advocacy, having a transparent industry, and also establishing some really thoughtful legislation for all of this. And thank you guys for all coming.
And talking about being forward-thinking, here in Southern California, we have the first offshore aquaculture activity that's been approved, Catalina Sea Ranch, and they have a booth in our Sustainable Seafood Expo today. So make sure you stop by and see that. They're going to be raising mussels offshore, 8 miles off Huntington Beach, and those are the kind of issues that we should be supporting. It's brand new. It's still kind of finding its sea legs, I guess. But the point is that these are the kind of things to support. Taylor, please.
Yeah, thanks. I do want to take a moment to address kind of a complicated issue here at the end, but I want to inform everyone. There's a lot of talk right now about illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing for short. And to just speak to that quickly, this is when someone is fishing against national laws or in contravention of international agreements, kind of like I was speaking to earlier. And that kind of fraud can show up in U.S. Sources from imports, maybe from countries that don't have as stringent regulations or the resources to enforce them is usually the case. And the U.S. government is trying to take some action by implementing a program starting next year. It's called the Seafood Import and Monitoring Program. And the idea is that foreign fisheries will have to register their fisheries with the U.S. So that we can verify that they have the same standards that we do on our own fishermen before we import from them. It's a pretty big undertaking, as you might imagine, with all the countries and how much we do import. As we were talking about earlier, 90% of the seafood that we eat in the U.S. is imported. So I just wanted to let you all know about that program, that it's underway. And when in doubt, I think we all kind of have the same thesis here. Local seafood is best. And I would just encourage you, if there's something you like that's not local, go for U.S. caught.
Big time.
So that's what I would say.
Great. Well, everybody, our time is up, but before we thank our panelists, I think I speak for each of them that they'll be here in the front if you have questions where you can come up and ask them specifically. So please do that. And in about a half an hour, we're going to have our keynote speaker. Adrian Grenier is going to be talking to us, and that's at 2:45 right here in the auditorium. So please spend this time asking questions of our panelists. Also, please go out there and sample some of the seafood that's available. Talk to the fish purveyors, talk to the restaurants, talk to the chefs. We're all in this together, folks.